I mean, you think I'm just talking. There were some fantastic mental health studies that were repeated that were done 20 years ago and 15 years ago. One was the Mid-Manhattan study, and the other was National Center for Health Statistics. One was fantastically comprehensive study of the mental health of everyone that lived in a certain radius in New York. They won't tell you what it was because they got so much data on them, but it included blue collar, white collar, professional, every kind of person, men, women, children, and whatever other sex exists. And then the other was national. And I mean, 20 years ago and 15 years ago, the mental health and well-being of women was so much worse than men in every age group after 20 that Jesse Bernard, a famous sociologist, wrote a book called The Death of Marriage, saying that marriage worked out fine for men, but it was driving women crazy. I mean, everything, depression, insomnia, nervous breakdown, feeling like I'm going to have a nervous breakdown, whatever it was, and deteriorated enormously each decade after 20 for both women and men, but much, much worse for women. Lo and behold, they do this study over again. They find that mental health no longer deteriorates with age. What? They look closer. The difference is women over 40. No difference at all for men. Men are just as bad off as they ever were. But women over 40 are not deteriorating. I mean, their mental health in the 40s and the 50s is just as good as it was in the 20s and 30s, and infinitely better than women's mental health was, and well-being, whatever you want to call it. It was a very large index 20 and 15 years ago. Men showed no such improvement. Men, I mean, in other words, now it isn't, women caught up with men, in other words. Women are not any longer deteriorating worse than men. Women are much better off than they used to be. Young women, on the other hand, in their 20s and 30s, are showing more signs of stress than young women did 15 and 20 years ago, and that's understandable too. Now, here's the moral. Quality, self-respect, some independence, some ability to get out of an impossible situation, some sense that you can do something about your own life has been terribly good for women. On the other hand, it is more stressful for young women to have to, in their 20s and 30s, figure out what they're going to do in life and not just expect to have it all be taken care of by getting married. Their problems would come later, you see, 20 years ago. They'd come, from 30 on down, it would get worse and worse, but they could evade the growing up, as I agree with her, by thinking everything's going to be taken care of by just getting married. Now, they still have those questions of marriage, children, whether they want to face it or not, but they also have to say, what do I want to do? What do I want to be myself? And they don't have any role models. They don't have enough role models, and they don't have some automatic patterns like the men do. So it's stressful for women. All right. There are some real problems, some necessary problems, and there are some transition problems, and then there are some reactions that are false problems at this moment. I want to tell you what I see as some of the things that I see as I go along interviewing this summer. I did these systematic interviews of young women and men, and then I'm involved in this new research project having to do with midlife and after. There is a reaction on the part of women. They react so strongly against this dependence, this passivity, what he called the Earth Mother, that there was like a throwing a baby out of the bathwater for some. And as long as you're locked in that reaction, there is no growth, really. Because you're still being defined by the old term. In other words, she says she has to be more independent than any man, you see. In other words, from that old swing from the old dependence. But underneath that, just as underneath for the macho male, she is so worried that if she lets down her guard for 1 minute, she'll drop back into that old blob, stance again. She isn't really sure that she can make it. I mean, she doesn't have there are certain things that are not automatic for women, and she doesn't have any models. And I have a daughter who's at Harvard Medical School, and I'm fascinated to watch the young women they go into medical school, they're terrific, they're very bright, and so on and so forth. They don't really want it. They don't, and they have a sense of concreteness about life that I think does come with their being a woman, maybe not biologically, but because they've been brought up that way and not the way the boy was brought up. So they are very critical of the medical establishment, and they really dig the holistic kind of approach, and they also worry a little bit how they're ever going to have a relationship, much less children, if it's 36 hours in the hospital, 12 hours off, or 24 hours on and 24 hours off. And they don't really want to be the role model of the man, and yet what other way there is to be, because the power is seductive. The power is seductive. You know, they're so problems. She's locked into this reaction. She was just a service station housewife, so for a while. She's damned if she's going to cook another egg, or she'll burn it if she does, you know? So she is, there was this focus from the women's movement on the jobs and the equal opportunity, and even some of the extremists had a rhetoric as if it was liberating, women's liberation meant liberating them from the family, from dependence on men. But even if those of us who didn't believe that, still there had to be, for a while, that focus on woman herself, getting herself together, getting her own act together, getting her own independence, and breaking through the economic barriers. All right, what do you see now? There's a sort of an impasse. I see young women. They are the people that give birth to babies, facing agonizing conflicts today that they sometimes can't even bear to face consciously about whether or not to have children. I fought for the right to choose, and we had to have that right. And the Supreme Court said it was more important than any right, many of the rights that were built in the Bill of Rights for men, that women should have control over the reproductive process. But the right to choose never was meant to mean that only for the right of a woman to choose not to have a child, you know, to have access to birth control and abortion so that she didn't have to have a child when she didn't want to, or against her will, or you know, that she could choose when and whether to have a child. And in fact, it should be legitimate for a woman to have her own existence as a person and be generative in other ways than to have a child. But it's not right when women today can't choose to have children because the paycheck is necessary. You know, they share the standard of living, because she knows that the whole responsibility is going to be hers, even if he's willing to share, because in fact that's been traditional, and even if he's really willing to share, the hours of work, the way the structures, the professions are structured, are still in terms of the man, and the man at a time when he wasn't expected to be home and sharing the parenting. If she takes some time off, there's no guarantee the job is going to be kept for her. What's open to her now will still be there. This is the only advanced nation without a national policy of parental leave, you know, parenting leave, maternity leave, paternity leave, whatever. We have, in the UN Year of the Child, this country is spending less on child care programs than 10 years ago, though. In fact, today, 57% of women between 16 and 64 work. The great majority of mothers work. The greatest influx into the labor force has been mothers of children under 6, you know, from a necessity. And by 1990, it is assumed that only 1 out of 3 mothers will be able to be a full-time housewives, mothers. So there needs to be some, in order to have children, do you see, there has to be some things that don't exist now. All right, she's moving into the work world. She has to, and there's no going back from that. It's with inflation, with everything else. Plus, once you know, you can't put them back on the farm once they've, you know, she does want to use her abilities just as much as he does. I mean, with all the talk, you know. You say, are they dating Roto-Rooters? Would you be a Roto-Rooter? I mean, you know, if you had a choice.
If you would date me, I would.
Yeah.